The year was 1513, and Niccolò Machiavelli sat in his modest study outside Florence, his political career in ruins, his ambitions seemingly crushed by the very forces he had once served. The Medici family had returned to power, and, with them came the systematic purging of all who had served the previous republic. Machiavelli, once a trusted diplomat and secretary, now found himself exiled, suspected of conspiracy, and stripped of everything he had worked to build. Yet it was in this moment of absolute defeat that Machiavelli would forge the mental framework that would make him immortal in human consciousness. As candlelight flickered across his weathered face, he began to write what would become The Prince, but, more importantly for our purposes, he began to crystallize the psychological principles that had allowed certain individuals throughout history to remain unbroken despite facing seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The observations that emerged from his exile were not merely political strategies but profound insights into the architecture of an unshakable mind. These were not the comfortable philosophies of sheltered academics, but the hard-won wisdom of a man who had witnessed power's brutal realities, who had seen empires rise and fall, who had watched strong men crumble and, seemingly weak individuals endure. What he discovered were 7 fundamental rules that separate those who break under pressure from those who emerge stronger from every trial. Part 1, The Foundation of Mental Sovereignty. Rule 1, Accept that life is fundamentally hostile. The first and, perhaps most crucial realization that transforms ordinary minds into unbreakable ones came to Machiavelli as he observed the fate of Cesare Borgia, once the most feared man in Italy. Borgia had possessed everything: wealth, power, military genius, political cunning, yet fortune had destroyed him completely within a matter of months. The lesson was clear: the universe operates according to its own logic, indifferent to human desires, hopes, or sense of justice. Most people spend their entire lives in a state of perpetual shock at life's unfairness. They waste enormous mental energy being surprised by betrayal, disappointed by failures, and outraged by setbacks. This constant state of surprise and indignation creates a vulnerability that life will ruthlessly exploit. The mentally unyielding understand that expecting fairness from an unfair world is not just naive, it's psychologically devastating. When Machiavelli wrote about fortune being like a violent river that floods everything in its path, he wasn't being pessimistic, he was being realistic. The person who accepts this fundamental hostility develops a different relationship with adversity. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" they ask, "How can I navigate this?" Instead of feeling betrayed by circumstances, they feel prepared for them. This acceptance doesn't breed cynicism, it breeds resilience. When you expect nothing from the world, everything becomes a gift. When you assume that most people will act in their own self-interest, you're not disappointed when they do, and you're genuinely moved when they don't. This psychological armor allows you to make clear-headed decisions even when everything around you is chaos. Consider how this principle played out in Machiavelli's own life. When he was imprisoned and tortured after the Medici return, he could have spent his energy raging against the injustice of it all. Instead, he accepted that this was simply how power operated: those who won eliminated threats, regardless of past service or personal merit. This acceptance allowed him to channel his energy into writing and thinking rather than into futile emotional protests against reality. Rule 2, Cultivate emotional independence. The second rule that creates mental unassailability is the deliberate cultivation of emotional independence. Machiavelli observed that the most powerful individuals in history shared one crucial trait: their emotional state was not dependent on external validation or circumstances. They had developed what he called inner counsel, a source of psychological strength that no external force could touch. This emotional independence begins with the radical acceptance that no one is coming to save you. Not friends, not family, not society, not God, at least not in the way most people hope. This sounds harsh, but it's actually liberating. When you stop waiting for external rescue, you stop wasting energy on disappointment and start investing it in self-reliance. Machiavelli noted that Lorenzo de' Medici, despite inheriting enormous power, remained psychologically fragile because he needed constant affirmation from others. Conversely, figures like Marcus Aurelius or Frederick the Great possessed an inner fortress that made them virtually immune to criticism, praise, or changing circumstances. They had learned to generate their own sense of worth and purpose from within. The cultivation of emotional independence requires several specific practices. First, you must learn to be your own source of approval. This doesn't mean arrogance or narcissism, it means developing clear personal standards and measuring yourself against them rather than against others' opinions. Second, you must become comfortable with solitude, not just physical but psychological. You must be able to sit alone with your thoughts without needing distraction or external stimulation. Third, you must develop what Machiavelli called the long view. Emotionally dependent people live and die by immediate feedback. A criticism ruins their day, a compliment lifts their spirits. The emotionally independent operate on longer timescales. They can endure years of criticism if they believe their course is correct, and they don't become overconfident from temporary praise. This emotional independence creates a profound psychological advantage. When others can't manipulate you through approval or disapproval, they lose their primary tool for control. When your sense of self isn't tied to external circumstances, you can navigate challenges with clarity that emotional dependence makes impossible. The story of Machiavelli's friend Francesco Vettori illustrates this principle. Vettori was a capable diplomat, but his need for social approval made him change his positions based on whoever he was speaking with at the moment. This emotional dependency made him unreliable as an ally and ineffective as a leader. Machiavelli, despite his exile and disgrace, maintained his intellectual independence and eventually influenced centuries of political thought. Rule 3: Master the art of strategic suffering. The third principle that separates the mentally breakable from the unbreakable is perhaps the most counterintuitive: the deliberate cultivation of discomfort and the strategic embrace of suffering. Machiavelli observed that those who remain strong under pressure have learned to make suffering work for them rather than against them. Most people approach life trying to avoid all discomfort, seeking the path of least resistance in every situation. This creates a fundamental weakness. When unavoidable suffering comes, as it always does, they have no framework for dealing with it except escape or collapse. The mentally unyielding take a radically different approach. They seek out manageable forms of suffering to build tolerance for the unavoidable varieties. This principle emerged from Machiavelli's observation of military leaders throughout history. The commanders who endured longest weren't those who tried to make war comfortable, but those who made themselves so comfortable with discomfort that war's hardships couldn't break them. They slept on hard ground by choice, fasted regularly, and deliberately exposed themselves to harsh conditions when they didn't have to. Strategic suffering operates on multiple levels. Physically, it involves deliberately choosing difficult paths, taking cold showers, exercising when you don't want to, fasting occasionally, sleeping less comfortably than you could. These practices aren't masochistic, they're insurance policies. They ensure that when life imposes discomfort on you, your system doesn't go into shock. Psychologically, strategic suffering means deliberately facing your fears and anxieties rather than avoiding them. It means having difficult conversations you'd rather postpone, confronting problems you'd rather ignore, and accepting responsibility you'd rather deny. Each time you choose the harder path when you could choose the easier one, you build psychological muscle. Emotionally, strategic suffering involves allowing yourself to feel difficult emotions fully rather than numbing them with distractions. When you're sad, you sit with sadness. When you're angry, you experience anger without immediately acting to make it go away. This builds emotional tolerance that serves you when life delivers unavoidable emotional pain. The key insight Machiavelli developed was that voluntary suffering creates a sense of agency over involuntary suffering. When you've chosen hardship before, hardship that chooses you feels less overwhelming. You develop confidence that you can endure whatever comes because you've proven to yourself that you can endure what you've chosen. This principle played out dramatically in Machiavelli's own experience of torture. During his imprisonment, he was subjected to the strappato, a torture method where the victim's hands are tied behind their back and they're hoisted by a rope, dislocating shoulders and causing excruciating pain. Yet Machiavelli endured this without breaking, partly because his years of deliberately choosing difficult paths had prepared him psychologically for unavoidable suffering. The strategic embrace of suffering also creates a profound psychological advantage in negotiations and conflicts. When others know you're willing to endure what they're not, they lose much of their leverage over you. The person who's comfortable with loss can take risks others can't. The person who's comfortable with criticism can speak truths others won't. The person who's comfortable with solitude can walk away from relationships others will tolerate anything to maintain. Rule 4: Develop absolute clarity about your core purpose. The fourth rule that creates mental unbreakability is the development of absolute clarity about what you're ultimately trying to achieve and why. Machiavelli observed that people break under pressure primarily because they lack a strong enough why to sustain them through difficulties. Without clear purpose, every setback feels pointless, every sacrifice seems wasteful, and every challenge appears overwhelming. Those who remain mentally unyielding possess what Machiavelli called fixed stars, unshakable reference points that guide all their decisions and provide meaning during dark periods. These aren't vague aspirations like happiness or success, but specific, personally meaningful objectives that can withstand scrutiny and provide direction when everything else is uncertain. The development of this clarity requires brutal honesty with yourself about what you actually care about versus what you think you should care about. Society, family, and culture all impose their own definitions of meaningful life, but the mentally unyielding discover their own. This often requires stripping away layers of expectations and assumptions to find what genuinely motivates you at the deepest level. Machiavelli's own core purpose became crystallized during his exile, understanding and documenting how power actually operates in human affairs. This wasn't a purpose imposed on him by others, it emerged from his genuine fascination with political dynamics and his desire to help future leaders avoid the mistakes he had witnessed. This clarity allowed him to endure poverty, exile, and disgrace because he knew his suffering served a larger purpose. The process of discovering your core purpose often involves examining your natural obsessions, the topics you think about when your mind wanders, the problems that keep you awake at night, the injustices that stir genuine anger in you. These emotional reactions point toward what matters most to you personally, regardless of what others might think should matter. Once identified, your core purpose becomes a filter for decision-making that dramatically simplifies life. Does this opportunity advance your purpose? Then, pursue it regardless of social approval. Does this relationship support your purpose? Then, invest in it regardless of convenience. Does this sacrifice serve your purpose? Then, make it regardless of comfort. This clarity creates immunity to many forms of manipulation and pressure. When someone tries to distract you with irrelevant opportunities or threaten you with irrelevant consequences, you can respond with indifference because their leverage doesn't touch what you actually care about. The person who knows exactly what they're building can't be derailed by criticism of their methods or tempted by alternative visions. The clarity also provides a framework for interpreting setbacks and failures. Instead of seeing them as random cruelties, you can evaluate them as either obstacles to overcome or information to incorporate. Every experience becomes data relevant to your purpose rather than meaningless suffering imposed by an arbitrary universe. Part 2, The Mechanisms of Psychological Warfare. Rule 5, Never reveal your true capabilities or intentions. The fifth rule that protects mental strength involves the strategic concealment of your true capabilities, intentions, and emotional states. Machiavelli recognized that in a world where information is power, those who reveal too much of themselves become vulnerable to manipulation, sabotage, and preemptive strikes from those who would prefer to see them fail. This principle emerged from Machiavelli's observation of both successful and failed leaders throughout history. Those who announced their plans openly found those plans thwarted before implementation. Those who displayed their full capabilities early found themselves facing coalitions designed specifically to counter their strengths. Those who wore their emotions openly found those emotions weaponized against them by clever opponents. The mentally unyielding understand that the world contains many people who feel threatened by others' success, competence, or emotional stability. These individuals will work actively to undermine what threatens their own position or ego. Protection requires maintaining what Machiavelli called strategic opacity, revealing only what serves your purposes while keeping your true depth hidden from casual observation. This doesn't mean living dishonestly or manipulatively. It means understanding the difference between transparency and vulnerability. You can be honest about your current actions without revealing your long-term strategy. You can be authentic about your values without exposing your emotional triggers. You can be genuine in your relationships without making yourself an open book to everyone you encounter. The practice of strategic concealment operates on several levels. Intellectually, it means not revealing the full scope of your knowledge or analytical capabilities unless doing so serves a specific purpose. Many people feel compelled to demonstrate their intelligence in every conversation, but this often triggers defensiveness or competition from others. The wise reveal their capabilities gradually and only as needed. Emotionally, strategic concealment means maintaining composure even when you're experiencing strong internal reactions. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally dishonest, it means choosing when and with whom to share your emotional state. The person who displays every emotion immediately gives others a map of their psychological vulnerabilities. Strategically, it means never revealing your full plan to anyone who doesn't need to know it. Even well-meaning people can inadvertently sabotage your efforts by sharing information inappropriately or offering premature criticism that undermines your confidence. The mentally unyielding share their plans on a need-to-know basis and reveal their full vision only to those who have proven themselves trustworthy allies. Machiavelli himself exemplified this principle during his diplomatic career. While serving the Florentine Republic, he often knew more about the true intentions of various Italian city-states than his own superiors realized. He revealed this knowledge strategically, sharing enough to demonstrate competence while keeping enough in reserve to maintain his value as an intelligence asset. The psychological protection this provides is enormous. When people don't know your true capabilities, they can't develop specific strategies to counter them. When they don't know your real intentions, they can't sabotage them preemptively. When they don't know your emotional triggers, they can't push your buttons to manipulate your behavior. This concealment also creates a profound psychological advantage in negotiations and conflicts. The opponent who reveals their hand early gives you information to use against them, while your concealed capabilities remain available for deployment at the optimal moment. The person who keeps their cards hidden can adapt their strategy based on what others reveal, while those who show everything early become predictable and vulnerable. Rule 6. Control information flow ruthlessly. The sixth principle that creates mental indestructibility involves the ruthless control of information flow, both what information you consume and what information you allow to reach you. Machiavelli understood that information is both weapon and poison, capable of empowering or destroying depending on how it's managed. Most people approach information passively, consuming whatever happens to reach them through social networks, media, or casual conversation. This creates enormous psychological vulnerability because much of the information circulating in any society is designed to trigger emotional reactions rather than promote clear thinking. The mentally unyielding take an entirely different approach. They curate their information environment as carefully as a museum curator selects artifacts. This active curation operates on multiple levels. First, you must identify and eliminate information sources that consistently trigger unproductive emotional states without providing actionable insights. This includes news sources that specialize in outrage generation, social media feeds that promote comparison and envy, and personal relationships that consistently deliver negativity without constructive purpose. Second, you must actively seek out information that serves your purposes and challenges your thinking in productive ways. This means reading primary sources rather than interpretations, seeking out perspectives that disagree with your current views, and prioritizing information that helps you understand how things actually work rather than how they should work. Third, you must develop systems for processing information that prevent emotional overwhelm. This involves setting specific times for consuming potentially disturbing information, creating frameworks for evaluating the reliability and relevance of what you encounter, and maintaining clear boundaries between information consumption and decision-making. The control extends to what information you allow others to share with you. The mentally unyielding become selective about who has access to their attention. They establish clear boundaries about what topics they're willing to discuss, what problems they're willing to hear about, and what level of emotional intensity they're willing to engage with in their personal relationships. Machiavelli demonstrated this principle throughout his career by maintaining extensive correspondence with multiple information sources while carefully filtering what influenced his actual decision-making. He gathered intelligence from merchants, diplomats, soldiers, and scholars, but he evaluated all information through his own analytical framework rather than accepting it at face value. This information control creates several psychological advantages. First, it prevents the emotional manipulation that comes from information designed to trigger rather than inform. Second, it ensures that your worldview is based on accurate data rather than propaganda or wishful thinking. Third, it protects your mental energy from being drained by irrelevant concerns that you can't influence. The practice also includes controlling what information you reveal about yourself to others. Every piece of personal information you share can potentially be used against you by those who wish you ill. The mentally unyielding share information strategically, revealing enough to build necessary relationships while keeping enough private to maintain their protection and freedom of action. Perhaps most importantly, controlling information flow allows you to maintain your own narrative about your life and circumstances. Instead of accepting others' interpretations of your situation, you can evaluate events through your own framework and reach your own conclusions about their meaning and implications. Rule 7. Develop multiple sources of power and independence. The seventh and final rule that creates mental unbreakability involves the systematic development of multiple, independent sources of power and security. Machiavelli observed that those who depend on a single source of strength, whether wealth, relationship, skill, or position, remain vulnerable to anyone who can threaten that source. True psychological resilience requires building multiple foundation pillars that can't be destroyed simultaneously. This principle emerged from Machiavelli's analysis of why some powerful individuals could weather enormous storms while others collapsed from relatively minor setbacks. The difference wasn't inherent strength but structural redundancy. Those who survived had diversified their sources of security and influence so thoroughly that no single attack could destroy their entire position. The development of multiple power sources operates across several dimensions. Financially, it means never depending entirely on a single income stream, employer, or investment. The mentally unyielding develop multiple ways to generate value and multiple forms of stored wealth that can sustain them through various types of economic disruption. Socially, it means building relationships across different spheres that serve different purposes. This includes professional networks that can provide opportunities, personal relationships that provide emotional support, intellectual communities that provide stimulation, and strategic alliances that provide protection or mutual benefit. No single relationship becomes so critical that its loss would be devastating. Skill-wise, it means developing capabilities that remain valuable across different contexts and time periods. This includes both specific technical skills that can generate income and general capabilities like clear communication, analytical thinking, and emotional regulation that serve you regardless of circumstances. Geographically, it often means maintaining options in multiple locations so that political, economic, or social changes in one area don't eliminate all your possibilities. This might mean maintaining relationships in different cities, countries, or regions that could provide opportunities if your current situation becomes untenable. Psychologically, it means developing multiple sources of meaning and identity so that setbacks in one area don't destroy your entire sense of self. The person whose identity depends entirely on their career becomes psychologically fragile when that career faces challenges. The person who derives meaning from multiple sources, work, relationships, creative pursuits, spiritual practice, intellectual development, can weather setbacks in any single area. Machiavelli himself exemplified this principle by maintaining simultaneous careers as a diplomat, historian, playwright, and political theorist. When his diplomatic career ended abruptly, he had other sources of meaning and potential influence to sustain him. His writings eventually provided more lasting power than his political position ever had. The psychological protection this diversification provides is profound. When you have multiple sources of security, you can take risks that others can't because failure in one area won't destroy your entire position. When you have multiple sources of meaning, setbacks become temporary inconveniences rather than existential crises. This redundancy also provides leverage in negotiations and relationships. The person who needs any particular opportunity, relationship, or position desperately has little bargaining power. The person who has alternatives can negotiate from strength and walk away from unfavorable arrangements. Perhaps most importantly, maintaining multiple sources of power and independence allows you to remain true to your values and principles even when others try to pressure you to compromise them. When your survival doesn't depend on any single relationship or position, you can afford to maintain your integrity even when it's costly in the short term. Part 3, The Synthesis of Unbreakable Character. The integration of these 7 rules creates what Machiavelli recognized as the ultimate form of human strength, not physical power that can be overcome by superior force, not intellectual brilliance that can be outwitted by greater cleverness, not social influence that can be destroyed by changing circumstances, but psychological anti-fragility that grows stronger under pressure. This mental unbreakability doesn't emerge overnight but develops through consistent application of these principles over time. Each rule reinforces the others, creating a synergistic effect that makes the whole greater than the sum of its parts. The person who accepts life's fundamental hostility while maintaining emotional independence finds it easier to embrace strategic suffering. The individual who has clarity about their core purpose can more easily control information flow and develop multiple power sources. The culmination of this development is what Machiavelli called virtue, a term that encompasses not just moral virtue but practical excellence, strategic wisdom, and unshakable character. Those who possess virtue become forces of nature in human affairs, capable of shaping circumstances rather than merely reacting to them. The psychological transformation that occurs through practicing these rules is profound. Where others see obstacles, the mentally unyielding see opportunities to demonstrate their capabilities. Where others feel victimized by circumstances, they feel empowered by their ability to respond effectively. Where others experience chaos and uncertainty as threats, they experience them as natural conditions that can be navigated with proper preparation and mindset. This transformation doesn't make a person invulnerable. No one is immune to death, disease, or the basic constraints of human existence. But it makes them psychologically unbreakable in the ways that matter most. They cannot be manipulated through fear because they've accepted what they're most afraid of. They cannot be controlled through others' approval or disapproval because they've developed internal sources of validation. They cannot be deterred from their purposes by temporary setbacks because they understand that all worthwhile achievements require persistence through difficulty. The historical examples that Machiavelli studied and the principles he derived from them remain as relevant today as they were 5 centuries ago because they address fundamental aspects of human psychology that don't change across cultures or eras. The specific challenges we face may evolve, but the mental tools needed to face them remain constant. Perhaps most importantly, the development of this mental unbreakability serves not just personal survival but the larger good. Those who can remain psychologically stable and clear-headed under pressure become sources of strength for others during difficult times. They can make the hard decisions that emotional instability makes impossible. They can maintain hope and direction when others lose faith. They can preserve important values and principles when social pressures push toward compromise or abandonment. Machiavelli understood that the ultimate purpose of developing unbreakable character wasn't personal aggrandizement but the creation of individuals capable of maintaining civilization's essential functions even during its darkest periods. The mentally unyielding become the foundation stones on which renewed prosperity and order can be built after periods of chaos and destruction. The journey toward this psychological resilience is neither easy nor quick, but it's available to anyone willing to consistently apply these principles over time. It requires the courage to face uncomfortable truths about human nature and social dynamics. It demands the discipline to choose difficult paths when easier alternatives exist. It necessitates the wisdom to see beyond immediate circumstances to longer-term consequences. But, for those who undertake this development, the rewards extend far beyond personal benefit. They become capable of achievements that seemed impossible, relationships that seemed unattainable, and contributions that seemed beyond their capabilities. They discover that the greatest form of freedom isn't the absence of constraints but the development of character that can thrive within any constraints that circumstances might impose. The 7 savage rules that create mental unbreakability aren't savage because they're cruel or destructive, they're savage because they cut through comfortable illusions to reveal the uncompromising realities that must be faced by anyone seeking genuine strength. They demolish the pleasant fantasies that make people weak and replace them with the hard truths that make people unbreakable. In accepting life's fundamental hostility while maintaining emotional independence, in embracing strategic suffering while pursuing clear purposes, in controlling information flow while developing multiple sources of power, we don't become inhuman or callous. We become more fully human, capable of enduring whatever difficulties life presents while remaining true to our deepest values and highest aspirations. The candlelight that illuminated Machiavelli's study as he wrote these insights has long been extinguished, but the psychological principles he discovered continue to burn brightly for those who seek genuine strength in an uncertain world. They offer not comfortable reassurance but practical wisdom, not pleasant platitudes but effective tools, not easy answers but enduring solutions to the permanent challenge of remaining unbroken in a world that breaks the unprepared. The choice to develop this mental unbreakability remains available to each person who encounters these principles. The path is clear, the methods are proven, and the destination, though demanding to reach, offers rewards that make every difficulty encountered along the way seem small in comparison. For in developing the capacity to remain unbroken regardless of circumstances, we discover not just survival but the possibility of genuine triumph over whatever challenges await us in an unpredictable future.